Meghan's lawyer appeared at the very end of the BBC documentary The Princess and the Press to state that the Duchess of Sussex is not a bully. But she was not aware that her body language spoke a lot more than she wanted to. Welcome back, my body language buddies. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the body language guy, and it would be great if you join us by just liking this video, subscribing, and hitting that bell. Let's get down to it. One of the hot topics of this documentary were the alleged bullying of Meghan to Kensington Palace staff in 2018. And to speak in behalf of her, there was Omid Scobie, co-author of Finding Freedom, and Jenny Afia, the Sussex's attorney. The first clip that you're going to see is her answer to the question, and pay attention to the wording, how accurate or inaccurate were the stories about her treatment of staff in 2018? Watch her reaction.
How accurate or inaccurate were those stories about her treatment of staff in 2018?
Those stories were false.
Maybe the most noticeable body language signal that you just saw was that lip pressing at the end. It doesn't have a direct meaning in itself, but it always counts as an emotional marker, in the sense that something is happening with the person's emotions as they are speaking. Now, the emotions involved could be nervousness, but why be nervous if you're telling the truth? That lip pressing, that emotional marker, can be paired with a subtle pause right before the word false.
Those stories were false. Those stories were false. Those stories were false.
So we have a body language marker after the word false, and we have a linguistic marker that is a short pause before it. But there is another clue, and it's her voice. When she says the word false, the volume of the word itself is a bit lower than the words the stories were. This is a voice marker, what is called a paralinguistic marker. So it's not one or two, but three different markers from three different dimensions that tells us that there's a problem with the word false. Now, each and every of these markers are related to not being that confident about what you're saying. The pause before the word, the lower voice volume, and the lip pressing. It does not necessarily mean that she's lying, but more like she's got her reservations about the statement. Even so, she shows a subtle eyebrow raise, which is a normal request for a non-verbal feedback from the interviewer. But this answer has a linguistic quirk, and that's why I suggested that you should pay attention to the wording.
How accurate or inaccurate were those stories about her treatment of staff in 2018?
Those stories were false.
The question was formulated in the form of accuracy. How accurate or inaccurate were the stories? And in her answer, she swaps the adjective of the question, inaccurate, for another, false. Now, our brain consumes a lot of energy, and it's always trying to cut corners so it can work in the most efficient way possible. And in any conversation, when you're asked a question and offered two options, the easiest way for your brain to answer is to actually use any of the options offered. That's why in an interrogation, you should make the questions as simple as possible, so it's easier to spot any deviation from your original wording. Any deviation suggests that there's more to the person's answer than just their words. Now, I understand that she's a lawyer, and it's part of her job being really careful with what she or her clients say. But the fact that she swapped the adjective could be that she was already prepared to state that the stories were false. It was a rehearsed answer, something that is common in legal environments. And there's another body language signal that suggests she was prepared to answer exactly that. She nods, she affirms with her head. But nowhere in the question is implied a yes or no. It's accurate or inaccurate, and she says the stories were false. All things considered, it will make more sense if she denied with her head. The stories were false. That's another friction between the actual question and her answer. But if she's a lawyer and she's careful with words and she was prepared to answer exactly that, then why did she display emotional markers of not being that confident? That's the kind of cluster signals that you pick up with your intuition. You feel like something is off, but cannot tell exactly what. And it's much easier to learn when you take your time to deconstruct people's reactions in this way. Now, the second clip is even more interesting because it's her actual statement of Meghan not being a bully. Take a deep breath and watch.
This narrative that no one could work for the Duchess of Sussex, she was too difficult at demanding a boss. and that everyone had to leave. It's just not true.
You watch this clip with a fresh awareness of those pauses before words, and the pauses here were longer. But the first body language signal that I want to mention in this second clip is that long blink. Long blinks usually mean that people are not that comfortable, that they might not like to do what they're doing, or that they rather be somewhere else. But it's one of those body language signals that has a very, very tiny weight, so it's mandatory to pair it with similar or contradicting signals. The next clue is that she looks at the camera, and this is a very interesting hint, but not for the reasons that you might be thinking. I found it interesting because that suggests that nobody noticed this when they were recording, because in the whole documentary none of those interviewed ever look at the camera. The only one that breaks the fourth wall or looks directly at us, at the audience, is Amol Rajan, the main reporter. So this apparent mistake could suggest that Afia's answer was the first and only take of her answer to this question. So that's a clue that we are looking at a truly spontaneous answer. And that's especially useful to analyze the next signals. First, she does another long blink. You already know that it's not much of a big deal, but we already have two of them. Next, she does something that we've seen in other episodes. She raises her eyebrows and presses them together. You might remember that the meaning of this facial display is sadness, and it's not something that everybody can do on purpose unless they have some practice. But we are lucky because I found a clip on YouTube of an online debate in which she participated, so it helped me to establish a baseline to her facial expressions. And I actually found that she does that eyebrow pressing together just for emphasis. She does it more than a couple times, and apparently there were no strong emotions related to those moments. So that's how you know that this particular and very intense facial expression can be discarded because it's part of her common nonverbal behavior. And this is important. Whenever you have the opportunity to check other instances of the person's expressions, that helps you to do better assessments and reach better conclusions. Right after she says, "not true," she presses her lips again. It's very subtle, it's blink and you'll miss it, but it's there. A lot like the lip pressing in the first clip after the word false. Now there's no doubt that she wants to defend her client, and if she's asked to make this sort of statements, it's more than clear that she's willing to do it, and on tape. The problem arises when, especially in legal matters, it's so important the way you say anything, especially when you have a high-resolution camera pointing at your face. In fact, that's a full-time job, training people to talk to cameras, to answer questions, to rehearse and practice responses, and make sure that everything, from your body language to your words to the way you dress, fit the message that you want to convey. Maybe Afia is just camera shy, or somehow she was a bit nervous. After all, she works for Meghan, so I think she's got enough things to worry about. But I'm sure this episode helped you polish your skills when the signals are so subtle and can easily go unnoticed. I'd be glad to read about your own experiences in the comments. If you want to refine your observation skills, all you have to do is download my 100 body language tips right in the description of this video. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas, and it will always be a pleasure, my body language buddies. Much love and bliss.